pretty sure this keyboard is the closest thing to cheating you can get without actually cheating. But let me explain. So this is Corsair's new K70 Pro TKL keyboard, not to be confused with the K70 RGB Pro or the K70 RGB TKL Champion series, or even the K70 Core TKL. Don't worry, I'm just as confused as you are. Anyway, the K70 Pro TKL is a 70% fully backlit RGB keyboard featuring Corsair's new Hall Effect fully adjustable switches, which they call MGX Hyperdrive, which is exactly what makes this keyboard different from your standard mechanical keyboard. But does it actually make a difference in your gameplay? Well, let's find out together, shall we? But before we do that, I do want to mention that the Corsair did provide me this keyboard as a review sample, but this video is not sponsored by Corsair, nor did they get to see this video before it was uploaded. So before we get to the whole "this keyboard got me out of silver" conversation, let's take a look at the board itself. It's made mostly from plastic, although I will admit the overall structure of the board feels solid and looks awesome in this all-white colorway. It's got flip-out feet on the bottom to create a slightly elevated typing angle. Aside from the plastic bits, it does have an aluminum top plate along with two sound dampening layers that gives the K70 Pro a pretty satisfying sound right out of the box. Of course, the prelude MGX Hyperdrive switches help with that, but overall, the fit and finish of the K70 Pro TKL is what you'd expect from Corsair, if not a little more premium. You also get a multi-function knob on the top right corner, which has a satisfying sound with defined stops, along with a nice textured knurling around the sides. By default, it controls your volume and will mute all your sound if you click the center, but can be configured to do other things like zoom, scroll, etc. There's also a game mode button, which will force the keyboard into static lighting, disable the Windows key, and ensure the keyboard's polling rate is maxed out to make sure there's nothing preventing you from getting your keystrokes in. Some of you may be wondering if this board is wireless, and unfortunately, it does require the USB-C cable in order to work, period. Personally, I'm okay with this, since you'll most likely be setting this up with your desktop anyway. But for those of you who like wireless keyboards, you may want to look elsewhere. But there's a good reason why the K70 Pro isn't wireless. It's speed. One of the main selling points of this keyboard is just how fast it can communicate with your PC. Corsair claims it has an 8,000 Hz polling rate through their Axon technology, which they claim is 8 times faster than standard gaming keyboards, which adds up since most gaming keyboards, with the exception of some newer ones, have only a 1,000 Hz polling rate, which, might I add, is plenty fast for casual gamers. Whether or not this makes a difference boils down to how pro you are. If you mostly use your keyboard for typing and for more laid-back games, you probably won't really notice a difference, especially if the games you're playing don't really rely on reaction time. But if you play games like CSGO, Valorant, Marvel Rivals, or Call of Duty, you probably will feel a difference if you're coming from a more standard keyboard. Not only that, but Corsair has also tucked in some pretty useful features to make use of both the magnetic Hall Effect switches and the high polling rate. For example, you have Rapid Trigger, which activates and resets keys instantly, so consecutive keystrokes always register when you want them. This is great for peeking corners or strafing back and forth without losing any keystrokes in between, allowing you to strafe as fast as your little fingers can move without having to fully actuate or reset the keys. It's also good for games like League of Legends, where you may be playing a champion that spams a certain ability on cooldown. You also get fully adjustable actuation, which gives you a really tight control on exactly when your keystroke is registered in relation to how much or how little you press the key. This is great for people who prefer to lightly tap their keys to make a move versus those who prefer to rest their fingers on the keys and rather have their actions occur when they fully strike the key. In addition to that, you can even set up a dual actuation, which allows you to set an additional keybind or stroke when you reach a certain actuation point. This is great for those who prefer to stick to as little keys as possible and use only one key to perform 2 actions. For example, holding W in most FPS games would make you run forward, but with dual actuation, you could say set your W key to run when half pressed, but sprint when fully pressed, removing the need to use the shift key altogether. You could easily take this idea and run with it to come up with multiple combinations that best suit your playstyle. This is what makes the K70 Pro TKL feel like it's cheating. Not only is it insanely fast at registering your inputs, it can actually register multiple inputs from the same key at the same time, essentially allowing you to set up some pretty insane key combos that might be the difference in winning a team fight, assuming you master it. In other words, these features won't inherently make you better, rather raise the floor for what's possible in your games. If you don't learn how to take advantage of it, they might as well not even exist. But if mastered, I could totally see a world where this keyboard could actually give you an edge over players using standard gaming keyboards. I think this is where the Pro in K70 Pro comes in. Now, I'll be honest, I don't play games like Rivals or CSGO, so I can't speak to whether or not this keyboard will actually help you in those kinds of games. However, I do think it enables high-skill players to execute more commands more consistently with more control. So if you're someone who actually knows what they're doing, a keyboard like this might actually allow you to do more than you could before, simply because the keyboard is no longer holding you back. For everyone else, this is going to be a pretty standard gaming keyboard, albeit a good one. Just don't expect to pull this thing out of the box and immediately play better. Quite frankly, you may play worse, especially if you don't take the time to set it up properly. I think there's long since been this idea that better gear inherently makes you a better player, and by now, most of us know that that's just not true. Instead, better gear can enable you to be better if you have the skill to utilize it. In any case, it's clear the K70 Pro TKL is aimed at fast-paced FPS titles or MOBAs where every keystroke matters, and in my experience, it certainly felt faster than any other keyboard I've used, even if I'm not quite good enough to fully take advantage of it. So what did I play with it? Well, as a longtime League of Legends player, I, of course, dusted off my account and jumped into a few games, and to be honest, I really didn't feel anything different. If anything, the keyboard felt ultra sensitive, which may have just been how I had it set. But that's sort of the deal with this keyboard. It all comes down to how you have it set and how you type on your keyboard, or I guess in this case, how hard you press on your keys when gaming. Regardless, everything felt super responsive, and I never felt like the keyboard was the reason for my missed skill shots or failed flash attempts. I did spend a little time tuning the actuation points for all my keys and found that 1 to 1.2 millimeters was the best for me. I did try it at 0.1 millimeter, and well, yeah, it was a little too jumpy for me, to the point where even lightly resting my fingers on the keys was too much pressure. I found myself accidentally hitting spells and abilities, which, as you can imagine, is kinda a big deal, especially in team fights where that one ability could be the difference between winning and losing. So you'll have to spend some time in the IQ software to figure out what feels best for you. What's crazy is we're literally talking about a 4 millimeter total travel distance, and yet somehow the difference of even 0.1 or 0.2 millimeters can be a world of difference when it comes to feeling. So take your time, try multiple actuation points until you find the one that works best for you. Oh, and as far as spacing goes, I didn't find this keyboard to be too big or wide for a pretty average sized play area, despite it being a 70% board. That being said, if you like to aim with your arm, you may need a larger play area, or you might find that this keyboard is a bit big, especially if you're used to something smaller, like a 60% keyboard. Overall, my League experience was pretty on par with what I'm used to, but again, what really shined here for me personally was the MGX switches, mainly because they're lubed and linear. They feel super smooth and almost creamy for an esports-oriented keyboard, coming from what I would consider one of the big three. However, I will admit the spacebar left a little to be desired. It's clanky and hollow compared to the other keys, and especially compared to the Ghost bar on the Newfie Halo 96, which is what I was using prior. Something to consider if sound and feedback are important to you, but otherwise, performance on the K70 Pro TKL was pretty top-notch, and it felt really good to use across the board. No pun intended. Now, interestingly enough, I also played Star Citizen with this keyboard. With the launch of 4.0, I felt like this was a great opportunity to see if this keyboard would be any good for a game that does rely pretty heavily on keystrokes, especially during FPS combat. Generally, my experience was really good. I often would use the game mode setting when launching the game and could feel a noticeable change in responsiveness that just made every movement feel so much more connected. It's kind of hard to explain, because while I wouldn't say other keyboards felt laggy or delayed, the K70 Pro definitely felt like my movements were happening as I thought of them rather than after. This made overall movement in FPS more snappy, more clean, and just more connected. And just like playing League, adjusting the actuation points is absolutely crucial to getting the best experience out of this keyboard. Setting the actuation point too far one way or the other will result in a really unpleasant experience, whether your keystrokes feel like they're not going through at all, to, oh my god, why did I just throw a grenade and almost kill myself? Yeah, 0.1 millimeter is really sensitive, guys, just like me. So I don't recommend it, unless you're absolutely psychotic and can somehow not fat finger all your buttons like I do. Or maybe I'm just bad. Speaking of adjustments, I do want to mention Corsair's iQ software, which, if you're unfamiliar, is basically the hub for all Corsair products and lighting. I'm not going to do a deep dive here, but the layout and controls for the K70 all lie within iQ, and without it, your board is gonna basically act like a normal keyboard, and you'll be missing out on everything that makes this keyboard worth anything. The good news is the K70 does have onboard memory, which is huge because it lets you save your profiles directly to the keyboard's onboard memory, allowing you to effectively set it up once with all your profiles, then just delete iQ if you like. Granted, you'll lose some control over your RGB and all that, but if you're purely in it for the performance and don't want to have iQ on your machine, you can totally set it and forget it, and that's awesome. On top of that, you can even unplug it and use it on any other machine, and it should automatically load your presets when powering on. So I recommend making at least 2 to 3 presets. One for your MOBAs or games where you're using QWER a bunch, one for typing because my god is it hard to type on this keyboard when it's set to be super sensitive, and one for your FPS games. Spend some time making adjustments to all 3 for a week or 2 before locking it all in, and once you feel like you've got it where you like it, you can either delete iQ or simply never mess with it again, but make sure you have onboard memory enabled because it may not be enabled by default, and make sure you save all your presets to the correct profile so you can easily swap between them. So to wrap things up, the K70 Pro TKL has been an absolute blast to use. If you're someone who doesn't need a numpad, wants the maximum amount of performance possible along with the most adjustable key switches out there, I think this is the keyboard for you. It has just enough of the premium keyboard features I'd want from a boutique keyboard, but it also has all the power and performance adjustability I'd want from a high-performance esports keyboard without making it freakishly small or niche to use outside of gaming, which reminds me, I did type this script using the K70 Pro, and the general typing experience I would say is pretty great once you set your actuations correctly. Keycaps were just the right height for me, and the lighting did make it nice to use in a dim room, though nothing to write home about. Then again, I'm not the most formal typist out there and certainly not the fastest, so your mileage may vary, but for me, coming from a Newfie Halo 96, which I love, the K70 just might be my second favorite keyboard I've used so far. As far as pricing and availability, the K70 Pro TKL is about $180, which I think is a solid price given other Hall effect keyboards on the market right now. I think for a Corsair keyboard, the K70 Pro TKL is a solid buy if you know nothing about keyboards beyond using them for gaming and want to stick to something familiar without having to dive deep into the mechanical keyboard rabbit hole. That being said, you can find the K70 Pro TKL on Amazon and Best Buy in both white or black, though I definitely think the white is nicer. Oh, and it does come with a wrist rest, but I basically never used it because I don't think the board angles up enough to warrant a wrist rest. That and the rest itself is a bit puffy for my liking, but nonetheless, it is magnetic and can be great if that's something you're used to. But that's gonna be it for this one. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit the like button, and as always, make sure to subscribe to see more content like this. Oh, and join our Discord. We'll be planning some giveaways, game nights, and more. All right, I'll see you in the next one. Peace.